Today I'm going to show you a little trick that I use for filling in for exotic woods. Now, on this particular project here, I have some African padauk on the ends here, and I have some dovetails cut into it. And although most of them fit pretty good, I have a couple small tiny gaps that I want to fill in with a little bit of padauk wood or padauk filler. Unfortunately, that's hard to find that at your local hardware store or your lumber store. So what I do generally is when I'm working with exotic woods, in this case, while I was on the router and I was routing out the dovetails for the ends here, I collected all the powder, the fine powder that was around there, not big chips, but just the powder. And the same thing if you were sanding, collect the sanding powder. And I put them in these little containers here that I actually get from fast food places when we have the condiments and that when we bring it home. I just wash them out and use them out in the shop. So I have this fine powder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it with some just regular Elmer's school glue. I like Elmer's school glue because it's going to dry clear, it's easy to sand, and all you need it to do really is just to bind these particles together. Titebond can work, but Titebond does have a color cast to it, and Titebond also is kind of not as easy to stand as this stuff is. So it's much easier to stand. So I'm just going to put a couple drops down here, and I blew that away there. So I'll just put a drop or two down here, and you don't need much glue on this. I mean, you don't want to have a lot of glue because it's mainly the particles or the shavings, I should say, the sanding residue of the padauk. So I just want to mix that glue in so that way the padauk will, all those pieces or all those tiny pieces will have glue on them so that when I put it into the openings here, it's going to stick. So I'm actually putting the same type of wood back into these little spots here. So in this case, I have a couple that are right there, and I'm just going to push that down into there. And it doesn't take much. You're not looking to fill large gaps with this. I wouldn't use it for other stuff other than just smaller gaps. Like you wouldn't want to use it to fill pocket holes or something like that. But if you use if you cut your own pieces of wood to fill in the pocket holes and then use this around that wood, that's okay. Now I have a rather large piece there, so I'm going to bring that chip off there because that's not fitting into my small area here. That looks good. And you see that once I get this on here, I'm going to take my finger, I'm just going to wipe away across the top. That makes it just a little bit easier to sand afterwards. And come on over to the side here. And this one little dovetail is probably the largest gap I have, which is maybe a 32nd, 16 or 64 32nd size gap. So again, just filling that in with this. And the nice thing about using, knock that over, so you guys who are watching this, you just fell over. So the nice thing about using the actual wood for this is that when you put the finish on, it's going to stain the same way. You don't use too much of the white glue so that way it doesn't affect the staining. And we'll look at that in a little bit. So what we'll do is you can see I just had small areas here, and I have one here that I think I want to go ahead and fill that gap right next to my dovetail there. Just one more tiny gap. And as you can see, this stuff is, and you'll see the close-up view of it, but it's just mainly we just want to make the shavings or the sanding particles or pieces so that they're sticky, so that they can fill in the gaps, and you actually have small bits of wood that are filling in all of these gaps. So again, the nice thing about the Elmer's glue is it does seem to accept stain a little better than like Titebond does, and it doesn't give it a finish to it. So we'll let this dry. I'll come back and sand this down, show you once it's sanded down, and we'll wet it here with a little bit of acetone to show you what it would look like when it's finished. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back, and so I let this dry about 30 minutes, and I'm going to give it a quick sanding over this. I'm using 220 grit here. So I will just sand this flat a little bit. Okay. That looks good enough, and we'll show you a close-up of it here so that you can see it with the light. There we go. And so once you get it sanded out, again, you're using the actual wood fibers. So we have, you know, these small bits of wood that are embedded in between these gaps. Now again, you use very little glue because you want the wood, once you sand it down, you want that raw wood to be exposed because that's what's going to accept the finish and everything else. So, and put a little bit of acetone so it's wet, and show you what that looks like. Again, it looks good. It blends, the wood all blends together. You don't have a noticeable putty fill there, and I think it really makes a difference. And it's really not that hard to do for any wood, really. I mean, you could do it with all wood. You don't have to just do it with what I'm using, the Padauk. But exotic woods especially, because you can't find fillers for those, and you can find red fillers, but they don't match. They're not even as close. So one way to fill in any gaps you may have on wood is just to collect shavings or very small dust shavings, small particles. Use, again, white Elmer's glue because it sands easy. Fill it in and move on. So that's a quick tip today to make your project look better. Hope you enjoy it. If you did, please hit that like and subscribe button, especially. That really helps out the channel. So I'd like for you guys to tag along as I continue on these projects. And this one will be up in a few days, the finished project here, so you can see what this is all about.